Chapter 13 is called The Great Accordion Concert. Although I had not yet mastered the fine art of moving the pile of marbles from one spot to spot with my toes, I received a new challenge in OT. I was going to learn how to play the accordion. Certain muscles of the arms and hands were used when pushing the accordion in and out, and it happened that I needed help with those particular muscles. The Sheltering Arms owned an accordion, and Miss Ballard knew I had 2 years of piano lessons. She said that the accordion was the perfect exercise for me. For my very first attempt, I hated it. It was heavy and awkward, and pushing it in and out made my arms ache. The trick of playing a melody on the keyboard with one hand, pushing the proper chord buttons with the other hand, at the same time as pushing and pulling, was completely beyond me. It'd be easier if you asked me to juggle and tap dance at the same time, I said. You just need practice, Miss Ballard replied. Just try a little bit longer. I did try. However, even when I got the correct right-hand note with the proper left-hand chord and pushed air through the bellows at the same time, I didn't care for the sound. I had never liked accordion music, and my efforts during OT did nothing to change my mind. When my parents heard about the accordion, Mother said, "Ah, what fun! You always loved your piano lessons." That's different, I said. I like the way the piano sounds. You already know how to read music, Dad pointed out. You're going to master the accordion in no time. I insisted I would never be able to adapt to the accordion, and Dad just kept saying it would be a breeze. I finally said, "Why don't you play it, if you think it's so easy?" "All right, I will," said Dad, and off he went to OT to borrow the accordion. He came back with the shoulder straps in place and eager on the face. My dad played piano by ear, so he didn't need sheet music, and even so, the sound he produced could only be called squawks. He pushed, and he pulled, he punched the buttons, he grew red in the face. Beads of perspiration popped out of his bald spot. Something vaguely resembling the first few notes of Beer Barrel Polka emerged from the accordion, but they were accompanied by assorted other sounds, none of which you could call musical. We girls covered our ears, made faces, and booed. We pointed our thumbs down, and Mother laughed until tears ran down her cheek. Finally, Dad admitted defeat. Temporary defeat. "I'll try again next week," he said. "Meanwhile, I want you to keep practicing." "It's going to sound just as terrible next week," I said, but I agreed to work on my accordion technique a little longer. The following Sunday, we could hardly wait to tease Dad about his musical fiasco. "When do we get the accordion concert?" Renee asked at the minute my parents arrived. "Wait!" exclaimed Alice. "I need to put in my earplugs." We teased until Dad reluctantly agreed to try it again. We snickered and tee-heed as he brought the OT accordion into the room. He sat on a chair and carefully adjusted the straps. "Quit stalling," I said. "What's the rush?" said Renee as she put her fingers in her ears. Dad began to play. Instead of squeaks and squawks, he played Beer Barrel Polka flawlessly, from start to finish, and our jaws dropped. We gazed at him and at each other in astonishment. When he finished the song, our questions exploded like a string of firecrackers. "How did you learn how to play? Who taught you? Where'd you get an accordion?" He simply smiled, and Mother applauded. Then they told us the whole story. He had rented an accordion from a music store and practiced every spare second in order to surprise us with his concert. "Can you play other songs?" I asked. It took me a whole week to learn that one," Dad said, "and he stayed up till midnight every night practicing," Mother added. After that, I didn't dare complain about my accordion. I never did get as good as Dad got in just 7 days, but I did manage to produce a few recognizable tunes, and the effort did help strengthen my arm muscles and fingers. The Sheltering Arms had a school with Dorothy, Renee, Alice, and I attended. Shirley was supposed to go too, but because of her weak back, she could only sit up in a wheelchair for an hour or so she didn't always make it to class. The staff consisted of one dedicated, overworked teacher, Mrs. West, who tried to help dozens of children of varying ages and educational backgrounds. It should have been an impossible task, made even harder by the fact that all of the students had physical disabilities. And yet the school was orderly and effective. Students in wheelchairs got wooden desktops attached to the arms of the chair and provided a writing surface. I love my new desk. For the first time since I got polio, I was comfortable writing. The desktop also made it easier and less tiring to hold a book. The school had a small library, and Mrs. West recommended books to us. A librarian from the Minneapolis Public Library brought books once a week and was always willing to take requests. I stopped reading books for children and began reading adult books. I read The Hunchback of Notre Dame, War and Peace, The Scarlet Letter. Because hot baths, physical therapy, and OT took up much of my time, I was in school for only 2 hours a day. Oh, I hungered for more. I especially liked hearing read-aloud books and writing book reports. Mrs. West had several 7th grade textbooks, but they were not the same books that I had in my school at home. She suggested that I try to get the same books my classmates in Austin were using. That way you won't be far behind when you go home, she said. My mother talked to the principal in Austin, who agreed that mother should bring me some textbooks from each of my classes, along with the weekly assignments that the other kids were doing. Because I'd already missed so much, and my hands were tired quickly when I wrote, I was not required to write the assignments or turn in my homework. At the end of the school year, I would take the same final exams that the other kids in my grade took for each class, and if I passed, I would go on to the 8th grade. But if I failed, I'd be held back a year to repeat the classes. No one ever told me to read my history assignments or study my math. It was up to me. Since I didn't intend to be a grade behind my friends, I gladly taught myself. Alice was interested in my schoolwork, especially my history lessons. Whenever I told her what I was reading, she listened carefully. Sometimes she asked questions which forced me to go back to my book for the answers. Other times we had lively discussions, which we both enjoyed. I learned to respect Alice's intellect, and I kidded her about getting a job as my tutor. The school had a collection of newspaper and magazine articles about Sister Kenny. Curious about the woman who invented torture time, I read them. I assumed that Sister Kenny was a Catholic nun. She wasn't. Sister is an Australian military term, the equivalent of first lieutenant in the United States Army. Elizabeth Kenny was a commissioned sister while serving as a nurse in World War I. Sister Kenny developed her unique treatments accidentally. While on vacation in the Bush Company of Australia, she was asked to help a sick child. Polio was not yet a common disease, and she had no idea what was wrong with the little girl, who was in extreme pain and unable to straighten an arm or a leg. There was no telephone, no doctor, no hospital nearby. Sister Kenny had a special interest and knowledge of muscles because her younger brother's muscles had been weak when he was a child. She developed exercises for him even before she began her nurse's training. She recognized that the little girl's agony was caused by severe muscle spasms, and she knew the relaxing power of heat. So she tore a wool blanket into strips, dipped them in boiling water, wrung them out, and placed them on the child, and the girl stopped crying and fell asleep. Each time the little girl awoke in pain, Sister Kenny applied more hot packs. As the muscles relaxed, she gently massaged the child's arm and leg until the girl was able to straighten up. A second child showed the same symptoms, and once again, Sister Kenny eased the pain with hot packs and massage. Using her knowledge of muscles, she suggested exercises for the children to do as soon as they were well enough. When she was finally able to discuss these cases with a doctor, she learned that her patients had suffered from infantile paralysis, which is the first name that polio had, and that her treatment had never before been tried. The doctor was amazed to learn that both children recovered. Family friends heard of her success in the Bush country and asked her to treat their child. As polio epidemics increased, so did reports of Sister Kenny's treatments, and other people sought out their help for their children. Not all patients recovered, but many did, especially those who received treatment early in the illness. The Australian doctors ignored her successes and didn't try her ideas. She opened her own clinic, and her methods worked so well, she began training other people to use them so she could open more clinics. The Australian medical officials, however, refused to sanction her work. In 1938, at the height of the polio epidemic, they issued a lengthy report to the public which stated that Sister Kenny's methods were mistaken and unnecessary. Discouraged, Sister Kenny left her homeland and traveled to the United States, settling in Minnesota. Word of her unusual methods preceded her, and when she arrived in the U.S., she was greeted by newspaper reporters. Possibly because the reporters created high public interest, doctors in the United States gave her a chance to demonstrate her methods. They were astounded by her results. Badly crippled patients showed rapid improvement if they began the Kenny treatment soon enough. News of her accomplishments spread, and many doctors in Minneapolis asked Sister Kenny to work with their polio patients. Soon, her procedures were widely accepted, and in December of 1942, Sister Kenny Institute, a facility for teaching her theories and methods, was dedicated in Minneapolis. Eventually, her methods were adopted all over the world, including Australia. As I read, I realized how fortunate I was that by the time I was stricken with polio, the Kenny method was standard treatment. Previously, many polio patients were put into splints and casts just to keep their arms straight. Polio causes muscle spasms, which feel familiar to Charlie horse cramps that people sometimes get in their legs. The spasms cause people's arms and legs to bend, and without treatment, those limbs sometimes stay bent forever. The casts were intended to prevent that. I remembered the cramps that bent my knees when I first got polio, and imagined how I would have felt if my legs had been put into casts. By comparison, torture time seemed like a picnic. Prior to Sister Kenny, some patients were left in casts for years. When the casts were finally removed, the patients could not move their limbs at all because the muscles, which were never used, wasted away. Because of the casts, even muscles not affected by polio became withered away. I didn't need to read statistics to know that the Kenny method worked. All I had to do was move my arms and legs. I was getting better, and hers was the only treatment that I ever received. If I had gotten sick a few years earlier while Sister Kenny was still in Australia, my future would certainly have been dreary. So in this chapter, we learned a lot more about Sister Kenny. So tell me, what happened in the book? What sort of thoughts do you have? And what sort of feelings do you have?